तक पहुंचाएगा।
Hello and welcome. I'm Asima Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. European leaders will join Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky as he meets US President Donald Trump in Washington on Monday, as diplomatic efforts continue in a bid to end the war in Ukraine. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, French President Emmanuel Macron, EU Commissioner von der Leyen, NATO Chief Rutte, Italy's Meloni, and Finnish President Stubb will all head to the White House. This comes as US President Donald Trump has said that Ukraine should make a deal to end the war with Russia because Russia is a very big power. This comes as a meeting of Ukrainian allies, the coalition of the willing, set to take place later today. Russia has said its forces destroyed 300 Ukrainian drones and struck storage sites for Ukraine's Sapsan missiles using warplanes, drones and missiles according to the local defense ministry. Moscow has claimed improved positions near Zolotiye Kolodiaz in Donetsk, while pro-Ukrainian maps indicated Kyiv's troops had contained the advance. Protests are taking place across Israel with calls for a hostage deal and end to the war in Gaza. This comes as Israel says Gaza residents will be provided shelter equipment. Air Canada announced it will resume flights today after the Canadian Industrial Relations Board Jobs Minister Patty Hajdu's directive ordered the end of a strike that suspended over 700 flights. The CIRB has instructed Air Canada flight attendants to return to work by 2 p.m. local time. A planned visit by U.S. trade negotiators to New Delhi later this month has been called off. The delayed talks on a proposed trade agreement dash hopes of relief from additional U.S. tariffs on Indian goods from August 27th. A magnitude 6.0 earthquake has struck central Sulawesi, Indonesia at a depth of 10 kilometers, injuring 29 people, including 2 in critical condition, according to the local National Disaster Mitigation Agency. The quake shook Poso Regency and surrounding areas, with Indonesia's position on the Pacific Ring of Fire, making it highly vulnerable to seismic events. Erin, the first hurricane of the 2025 Atlantic season, has been downgraded to a Category 3 with maximum sustained winds of 125 meters per hour, according to the U.S. National Hurricane Center. The storm, now 330 miles east-southeast of Grand Turk Island, had earlier reached Category 5 strength with winds of 160 mph before weakening. In the past few minutes, a wave of confirmations has come in from European capitals. Several top leaders will join Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky for his crucial meeting with US President Donald Trump at the White House on Monday. The meeting will be joined by UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Apart from him, European Commissioner President Ursula von der Leyen, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, French President Emmanuel Macron, Finnish President Alexander Stubb, and Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni all have now confirmed their presence at the DC meeting. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte will also attend. Von der Leyen has said in a post on X that she was joining the talks at the request of President Zelensky. The coordinated move appears aimed at preventing a repeat of the tense encounter Zelensky has faced during his last meeting with President Trump on February. By standing alongside President Zelensky, European leaders hope to signal unity and support and to reduce concerns in Kyiv and other European capitals that President Trump could pressure Ukraine into a peace deal with Russia on U.S. terms. Now, for this discussion, we are joined by Madhav Nalapad. He's the editorial director at TSG. Thank you, Madhav Nalapad, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, what's your reaction of the participation of all top European leaders in upcoming Ukraine's meeting? Do you think they couldn't trust Zelensky for getting a deal for Ukraine, or they couldn't trust Trump here?
Look, I think the question of trusting Zelensky, they trust him completely. I mean, they've shown it by the massive amounts of money they've been spending on the Ukraine war. But the fact is that they believe that by this kind of a united front, now in this, frankly, Giorgia Meloni is the odd person out. I'm not sure that she will agree wholeheartedly with the other three. Ursula von der Leyen and the other two have from the start been great supporters of this war on Russia. I mean, the war that began after Putin invaded Ukraine. But the reality is that I don't think President Trump is a person who likes pressure. And he will feel that these people are putting pressure on him. And that's why I think Sir Keir, that is the Prime Minister of the UK, has very wisely kept out of this. And as far as Giorgia Meloni is concerned, I don't think she's going to push President Trump too hard because she knows that the transatlantic relationship could be at risk. And Sir Keir of the UK has acted very wisely in not joining with this kind of an open attempt to pressurize Donald Trump to basically agreeing on Zelensky's terms, which are completely unacceptable to Putin. Now, terms which are unacceptable to Putin, but the reality is Zelensky has not had an election for a very long time. And there should be an election now in Ukraine. With whatever land is there in Kiev's control, they should have an election so that we can see how popular he is. He no longer can be called a popularly elected leader. He's basically a leader who has been overstaying his legal term. And I think this is a very open attempt to put pressure on Donald Trump to basically agree to the terms of Zelensky, which basically are totally opposed to any kind of territorial concession whatsoever. In fact, he's still absolutely adamant that he should get back those parts of Ukraine which were taken over by Russia since 2014, which Putin absolutely is not going to do. So quite frankly, and I think Donald Trump knows that, he's had a long meeting with President Putin, and I think that's a very good thing, because I don't think Russia should be pushed so hard that it goes completely into the China corner. India that way is valuable in that respect, because we are extremely friendly with Russia. But the reality is that Zelensky's terms are unacceptable, and the European leaders have got to save face with their own electorates. They spend so much money on this futile war that they don't want to publicly admit it's a futile war. So they're trying to push Trump into concessions that he knows are unacceptable to Putin, and therefore setting Trump up to be a failure in his efforts to bring peace to Ukraine, a peace that is acceptable to Russians as well. You can't have a peace conference with just one side, and that's what these European leaders have been doing. Peace conference after peace conference, with only Ukrainians taking part, and not the Russians. So that's absurd. How do you make peace without both sides sitting at the table? So personally, I mean, I think it's a very open attempt at putting pressure on President Trump to basically toe the line of President Zelensky. And I don't think it will make him any more friendly to President Zelensky, to put it very mildly. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Nalapad, for sharing that. And given this history, again, of tense encounters between President Zelensky and President Putin, President Trump, what does this meeting suggest about the evolving dynamics between Ukraine and U.S. in particular?
Look, the U.S. is making a lot of money out of this war. The U.S. is supplying weapons paid for by basically by the European countries. There are vast amounts of money have been spent in Ukraine, and vast amounts of money are going to be spent in future. There was a time under Joe Biden when the US was also spending a huge amount of money, although I think the Europeans are more or less matching that. But today, the Americans are spending nothing, zilch. In fact, they're making tons of money by selling weapons to Ukraine, which Ukraine pays for by money it's received from Europe. So the dynamic, very frankly, with President Trump is very different from that under President Biden, who was one with the European leaders in trying to get Russia defeated. So the Trump is different. He's a bit more realistic, much more realistic in some respects, somewhat unrealistic, of course, in other respects. But the fact of the situation is that as far as President Zelensky is concerned, I don't think it'll melt the ice between him and President Trump, because any kind of pressure works very badly on President Trump. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madhav Nalapad, for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now we stay on this topic. The French presidency said that the leaders of Britain, France, and Germany will host a video call later today involving Kyiv's allies in a coalition of the willing to discuss steps towards peace in Ukraine. The meeting, coordinated jointly by British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, French President Emmanuel Macron, and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. This comes a day before Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky travels to Washington to hold talks with U.S. President Donald Trump. The coalition of the willing, set up by the UK and France as the Trump administration threatened to withdraw security support for Europe, is made up of more than 30 countries working together to support Ukraine. Its aim is to provide security guarantees to Ukraine in the event of a deal being reached between Kyiv and Moscow, with several countries, including France and the UK, having pledged to send troops on the ground to enforce a potential agreement. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Madhav Nalapad. He's the editorial director at TSG. Thank you, Madhav Nalapad, for staying with us. Now, looking at these both news that we discussed earlier and this one, how might this European leaders' involvement in the upcoming meeting influence the outcome, especially in terms of you mentioning that Trump doesn't like pressure in some instances like this one?
Look, the European leaders are going to talk among themselves in an echo chamber and without the presence of the United States. And bringing NATO into it, it will be NATO minus the United States, because the United States is not going to go to war over the issue of Ukraine. War with Russia, which is probably got more nuclear weapons than the US, if not the same, then possibly more. So US is not going to go to war with Russia. And the million euro question will be, are the Europeans prepared to go to war with Russia to fight for Ukraine? What are the electors going to say about that? What are those who handle their finances going to say about that? Because costs will be astronomical. It will be ruinous. The fact is, they are not willing to put boots on the ground until, quote unquote, there is an agreement. An agreement, well, it's like a ceasefire. But Putin will not accept an agreement which of the kind that European leaders want him to accept. So they are talking in an echo chamber, basically to themselves, the way they have talked, dozens of times, literally dozens of times in front of global media, and they're just posturing, frankly. One can predict what they're going to say. Ukraine cannot surrender territory. Russia has committed aggression. This is a highly dangerous thing for the whole of Europe. If we don't defend Ukraine to get back its land, then all of us in Europe can be invaded by Russia. The same mantras which they repeated throughout the course of this war, they'll be repeating to themselves again, and in the hope that President Trump will get a summary of what they say. And I think that is not going to, what do I say? That's not going to make him particularly happy. Thank you.
Thank you. And Also now today they have scheduled a video call hosted by UK, France and Germany with Ukraine's allies. Highlights a united front on Ukraine's security, of course. So how crucial is this coalition of the willing in shaping future peace talks between Ukraine and Russia?
Look, this is a coalition of the willing, provided there's no war, provided there's an agreement. If there's no agreement, there's no coalition whatsoever. I don't know a single country in this group. I mean, even the Germans who have been the most enthusiastic, or the French, who are going to then, agree to have a war with Russia. The UK and France are nuclear weapon powers, but so is Russia. I mean, much bigger than either of them or both of them put together. So the reality is, well, I mean, what kind of a, what are we talking about? Are they willing to go to war with Russia? That's been the question from the beginning. They're willing to go to war to sacrifice more Ukrainian lives. I said early on, very early on, that, they will fight to the last Ukrainian, but they're not going to fight themselves. They'll leave it to Ukraine and they'll shower Ukraine with money. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madhav Nalapad, for always joining us and sharing your insight throughout our news as an editorial director of TSG. Now we move on to our next news. Jordan's army is airdropping humanitarian aid to Gaza, aiming to alleviate the hunger crisis in the enclave. The aid reportedly includes food and baby milk bound for Gazans more than 22 months into Israel's military offensive in Gaza. Residents have been grappling with a worsening hunger crisis. This comes amid Israel prepares to relocate the Gazans. Israel has said that Gaza residents will be provided with tents and other shelter equipment starting today. This comes days after Israel said it intended to launch a new offensive to seize control of northern Gaza City, the enclave's largest urban center, in a plan that raised international alarm over the fate of the demolished strip, home to about 2.2 million people. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu last Sunday said that before launching the offensive, the civilian population will be evacuated to what he described as safe zones from Gaza City, which he called Hamas's last stronghold. Now for this discussion, we are joined by Mark Sutherland. He's a geopolitical commentator, joins us live from London. Thank you, Mark, for joining us today. Good to see you.
And you.
Now, what's your analysis about what's going on in Israel and between Israel and Gaza, in Gaza? Do you think things are becoming better?
Well, since the attack of the 7th of October 2023, as you are fully aware, as the world is fully aware, if they're actually paying attention properly to what's going on, Hamas has been using the civilian population of Gaza as human shields, even though many of them, they voted for Hamas and they are behind Hamas and have celebrated that. So let's just put that on the table. The number one thing here for the IDF to continue their operations, as they've always shouted about, is that the Gazans need to be removed, inverted commas, the civilian population. Why they have not gone into Egypt, why have they not gone into Jordan, is because of historical reasons that always go back to an ideology of being very, very concerned about the Muslim Brotherhood ideology. That is there. We've also recently covered the fact that internationally there is the aid that has been out there ready to go in, and then there's been the UN pressure to then stop the Gazan humanitarian fund, and also very recently in negotiations we understand that Hamas were even discussing that, to say that they cannot provide the humanitarian aid anymore because we want that to go back to the UN. And the reason why they want that to go back to the UN is that they have made millions and millions of pounds of that, taking the UN trucks. I think something like either 28% of the UN trucks, they either get through to the Gazans, they then take that food, they then sell it back to them, which finances their war effort. For the IDF to go in, who have taken a considerable amount of effort to clear the Gazan population out of their way at terrible risk at times to their own troops, they need them out the way to go into Gaza City to, as you alluded to in your report, to then get rid of the last bastion of control in regard to Hamas. And there has also been the concern, the understanding that that is where a number of hostages, maybe even hostage bodies, that we're looking at 20 alive hostage still, that maybe in Gaza City itself. Asima.
Thank you, Mark, for sharing that insight with us. Please stay with us as we stay in the region now. The Israeli military has announced today that it targeted an energy infrastructure site south of Yemen's capital, Sanaa, which was reportedly used by Iran-aligned Houthi rebels. Israeli media identified the Haziz power station as the site struck. The military stated the attack was in retaliation for repeated Houthi missile and drone assaults on Israel. Al Masirah television controlled by the Houthis has called the strike an aggression, claiming it damaged some generators at the power station. Although the source of the attack was not confirmed, local reports mentioned hearing at least 2 explosions in Sanaa. Firefighters reportedly managed to control the blaze caused by the strike. Israel's bombing campaign in Yemen follows Houthi missile attacks aimed at Israeli targets, largely intercepted. The Houthis claim these actions are in support of Palestinians during the Gaza war. The US and UK have also previously targeted Houthi positions, while a May deal between the US and Houthis saw a pause in bombing campaigns in exchange for an end to Houthi attacks on Red Sea shipping. However, the Houthis have maintained that the deal does not include an agreement to spare Israel. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Mark Sutherland. He's a geopolitical commentator, joins us live from London. Thank you, Mark, for staying with us. Now, this Israel's retaliation actions in Yemen further complicate its relations with other regional players, particularly in terms of its stance on Iran and the ongoing conflict with Palestinian groups, while it wants to join the Abraham Accords now.
Well, we always have to bear in mind that the Houthis are an arm of the Iran ring of fire. Plus, also the Houthis have been threatening to disrupt. They have done shipping in that region as well, and as you pointed out in that report, they have fired on to Israel a number of times, including rockets into Ben Gurion, and they are not going airport around that area. They are not going to take this lying down. I think my own understanding of this is that this looks like the second sort of infrastructure attack, being the one in June, which was on the harbour front there in the Houthis, and we are talking a number of kilometers away, to say the least. So they have gone deeply out of their way to do that, to attack the infrastructure there. Again, as a warning, remember that the Houthis rebels have been firing rockets, and about the disruption that they are then cause. And I underline this as the Israelis have dealt with Hamas. They've dealt with Hezbollah up north. They have then had a 12-day war with Iran, and then there is a tension in regard to dealing with the rest of Gaza City, as we just talked about. They then have to deal with the Houthis, who have been continuing to disrupt Israel and disrupt shipping in that area. Asuma.
And Mark, now Israel's recent strike on Yemen's Haziz power station, is this retaliation for Houthi missile attacks attacks raises questions about the broader regional conflict. So how does this escalation between Israel and the Houthi rebels fit into the larger geopolitical dynamics of current Middle East?
Well, I think to be fair, we have to say that, Israel did not start firing on the Houthis by any stretch of the imagination first. The Houthis did that. They are part of the ring of fire in regard to Iran, where it has then financed, armed their proxies, which Houthis are part of, to surround Israel. Yes. We then had the awful situation in the south of Syria with the Jews, with the Alawites, also attacking Christians as well. And you're very aware that Israel then went and bombed various targets in Syria and in Damascus as a warning shot, and also to stand up for the Druze community there. There's also a very strong Druze community in Israel, and there is a relationship. And as I say, the Druze actually also participate in the IDF. How this disrupts things. We've seen a 12-day war. We've seen so many changes in regard to dealing with Hezbollah. We look at what's happening in Lebanon, where the Lebanon government are wanting this terrorist arm out of their country. So, Asuma, they're not saying it very simply. There are a lot of changes that are going on, and the IDF, as was said, they said they will go into Gaza City to then get the job done. The job needs to be done there. You cannot have this terrorism on your border. I don't think any country would actually tolerate that whatsoever. Plus, they haven't started or asked for this war. They are then dealing with the other proxies, etc., around them. So we have to wait and see. I think one of the number one things, just finally, in that area, in understanding the Middle East, is that they respect a strong man. They respect strength, which is something that we in the West find very, very difficult to actually understand, and we need to get our head around how these things play out within the Middle East. Asuma.
And Mark, do you think there's still some things that international community can do to de-escalate tensions between them, so that it doesn't escalate further to, yes, the occasion you mentioned, that 12 days of war that took place earlier this year? Do you think there is any country in Middle East that can mediate between them?
Well, the thing is, we've got to remember that when we're looking at reports from Al Jazeera, we have to question that in regard to who finances Al Jazeera. Qatar. What does Qatar get up to in financing that, in financing then Hamas, having the leaders of Hamas that were recently living within it, while they're trying to broker peace deals? They're also financing terrorism and a particular media ideology. So we have to bear all of those things in mind, and the fact that President Trump turned around and said that Iran must not go full bore and have a nuclear weapon. So that within regard to Iran, maybe certain things there will have to then be readdressed in the future. Iran is not having a very pleasant time because it's having to deal with droughts and things naturally that it is having to face up to. So again, Asuma, there is a lot. The thing is about when people can mediate, are they mediating by being genuine, or behind their back are they then up to other things as well? And the other thing is, it's all very, the Arab countries have asked Hamas to say now you have to disarm, now you have to then leave Gaza. Is that because they actually see that the IDF is getting ready to actually finish the job? As we've always said, straight from day one, Israel have made it very clear that the war would have stopped if the hostages were released straight away. They took 250 hostages on the 7th of October. We've seen how the deaths are. We've also seen how they've been released, and if they were released on the 8th of October, or even on the 7th of October straight away, then that war, with Israel entering 2 weeks, the war would have ended. Thank you, Wasima.
Yes, thank you very much, Mark Sutherland, for always joining us and sharing your insight throughout our news on this topic and others. Thank you very much. Now we move on to Pakistan. In Pakistan, at least 344 people have been killed as flash floods continue to devastate communities across the country. The National Disaster Management Agency has confirmed the death toll on Sunday, with thousands more displaced after heavy rains washed away homes, roads, and farmlands. Lieutenant General Inam Haider Malik, chairman of the NDMA, has told reporters that the scale of destruction highlights Pakistan's growing vulnerability to extreme weather. He has said that we have witnessed damage that unfortunately is part of the broader climate change challenges Pakistan has been grappling with for a long time. Here's his full statement.
इन दिनों में पाकिस्तान आर्मी की तरफ से भी वहाँ पे सर्च एंड रेस्क्यू की टीम्स को पहुँचा दिया गया था KPK के अंदर, और उन तमाम लोगों की तलाश जारी है जो अभी तक मिसिंग हैं। गुज़श्ता 2-3 दिनों में हमने जो ख़ास तौर पे बुनेर, बाजोड़, बडग्राम और इस तरह के मुतलका इलाकों में जो नुकसानात देखे हैं, वो बदकिस्मती से उस मौसमियाती तब्दीली का एक हिस्सा है जिस वजह से पाकिस्तान काफ़ी अरसे से उसमें बरसरे पैकार है। गिलगित बल्तिस्तान में और खैबर पख्तूनख्वा में उन तमाम जगहों पे जहाँ पे हमारे पुल टूट गए हैं, सड़कों का नुकसान हुआ है, वहाँ पर जो आबादियाँ इस वक्त ज़मीनी रास्ते से कट चुकी हैं, उनको बहाल करने की फौरी तौर पे कोशिश की जा रही है। उन तमाम अज़ला में जहाँ पर जानी नुकसान ज़्यादा हुआ है और लोग अपने घरों से डिस्प्लेस हो गए हैं, वहाँ पर फौरी तौर पर रिलीफ पैकेज पहुँचाया जाएगा, जिसमें राशन, अद्वियात और टेंट का सामान, या अगर आर्जी तौर पे हमें कहीं पे कैंप लगाने पड़े तो वहाँ पर उसका बंदोबस्त भी किया जाएगा।
Authorities say rescue operations are ongoing, with the military deployed in multiple provinces to assist stranded families. Aid groups warn the impact will be long-lasting, with livelihoods destroyed and many regions still underwater. Now for this discussion, we're joined by Desmond Majekodunmi. He's an environmentalist, joins us live from Lagos. Thank you, Desmond, for joining us today. Good to see you. Now, how can Pakistan balance immediate disaster relief efforts with the need for long-term infrastructure and policy reforms?
Yes, this terrible, terrible tragedy that has now hit Pakistan is like, hitting different spots all over the world. And there's absolutely no doubt that they need to get the right sort of infrastructure in place. However, even with the best of infrastructure, considering the quantity of rain that is falling in some of these locations these days, that has been classified by the Secretary General of the United Nations as rain bombs. I mean, you're getting, like, in some cases, 6 months, even 9 months rain falling in just 8 hours. This will overwhelm anything that you have on ground, especially if it is manufactured, drainage systems. The natural systems tend to be able to handle it a little bit better, but we've destroyed a lot of the natural systems. I'm talking about the mangroves and the regular forests, which have a way of absorbing the water and then releasing it very slowly through evapotranspiration. So definitely, unfortunately, we have to get ready, because far worse is imminent. And we can learn a lot from the great nation of India, because this is a classic example of what can only be described as karmic reaction. The earth is obliged to react to what you give her. And if you're going to be giving her millions of tons of heat-trapping gases that is going to cause greenhouse gas expansion, that is going to cause greenhouse heating on the earth, then you're going to upset the weather systems. And it's basic and it's simple. So we need to learn from this, because we're going to invoke a lot worse on ourselves. And isn't it interesting that, on one side or different corners of the earth, you have these massive rain bombs, and then in other areas, you have extreme dryness, again, because of the overheating. And this dryness leads to bushfires. They have a bushfire that's been burning in United States of America since the 4th of July. And interesting, that particular bushfires, I think I mentioned before, was triggered by lightning bolts on the same day as they had a very tragic flood in Texas that took away hundreds of people. On the 4th of July, in a nation whose president actually has the temerity to deny climate change, the reality is we need to get into our consciousness the fact that we will get comic reactions for our actions. And this is something that the great nation of India, and I don't use that word lightly, I've had quite a lot of experience with some very renowned Indian people, so I'm a little bit familiar of what has gone on there and how India has been able to lift herself up through an incredible agricultural revolution, through all sorts of other systems of backward integration to develop the industries and so on, but also because she has a very real, I can call it a spiritual belief that expresses reality. It's real.
Yes, indeed. But India, also Pakistan, both of them are struggling with these continuous flooding, and it continues. Thank you, Desmond, for joining us today and sharing your valuable insights as an environmentalist on the environmental issues. Thank you very much. That was Desmond Majekadunmi. He joined us from Lagos. This is all we have time for. We will